Welcome to our podcast, Leading Past Limits. We share lessons learned from the hard-won experience of mission-driven leaders so that you expand your horizons as a leader that places service before self. I'm Kumar Kibble, a leadership coach and the principal at GuideQuest. I've been passionate about developing leaders since graduating from West Point more than 30 years ago, and have led high-performing teams as a military officer, special agent, diplomat, government, and corporate executive. Now I partner with leaders and teams as a coach to help unlock their potential and maximize their impact. In this first season, join me in learning from entrepreneurs, CEOs, Army generals, police chiefs, war heroes, thought leaders, and more. Be sure to subscribe and don't miss out on lessons learned from the real world School of Hard Knocks. Our guest today is Major General Diana Holland. She graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and was commissioned a second lieutenant in the Corps of Engineers in 1990. She served in the Operation Freedom Sentinel, Joint Task Force Sapper, and Task Force Diamond in Afghanistan. She also served in Operation Iraqi Freedom. As commander of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers South Atlantic Division, she oversaw support to states dealing with disasters following Hurricanes Irma, Maria, Florence, and Michael. In 2015, Major General Holland was the first woman appointed Commandant of Cadets at West Point. Earlier that same year, she became the first woman to serve as a general officer at Fort Drum and as a deputy commanding general in one of the Army's light infantry divisions. She currently serves with the Army Corps of Engineers as the commanding general of the Mississippi Valley Division and is the president of the Mississippi River Commission, both firsts for a woman in these appointments. Her awards and decorations include the Army Distinguished Service Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster, the Legion of Merit with 1 oak leaf cluster, and the Bronze Star Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters. And in June 2018, she was recognized by Atlanta Magazine as a woman making a mark. Diana, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kumar. Great to join you.
So you were the daughter of a U.S. Marine. So I'm really interested in what inspired you to join the military in general, but the Army in particular.
Well, and that is a great place to start. I get asked that a lot, and sometimes I wonder myself how I got to what inspired me at such an early age. Because at age 6 is when I first told my dad that I wanted to be a Marine. That was the first dream that I had. And why at 6? Why that early? The only thing I can think is that because he had been a Marine, my grandfather had been a Marine, and they talked a lot about having been Marines, even though neither of them served for very long, no more than 3 years, each of them. But it was something, they told stories, they still had their uniforms, they had various things around their home, the homes that would take them back to that. And some of their funniest stories were about having been in the Marine Corps, something silly that happened that they could both laugh about, even though, of course, they didn't serve together, but they had that shared experience. And so I think that was certainly an early influence on me. The other thing I think that led me down this path is that my dad, also when I was at a very early age, I was an only child. And he was determined to make sure that his daughter was not going to be intimidated or somehow lack confidence to achieve her dreams. And so I can remember my earliest memories are of him encouraging me to do hard things, to try things, to not be afraid. He would say, "You live in the greatest country in the world. There are more opportunities in America than anywhere else. Whatever you set your mind to doing, if you're good to people and you work hard, you can achieve them." And I think those foundational principles is what got me on the track. It was him being a Marine that led me to think that military service would be pretty cool, to be a part of a team, to serve a higher ideal. He's patriotic. So I think all of those things kind of fed off of each other. And a few years later, he told me, so 6, I tell him I want to be a Marine. He says, "No, you don't. You don't want to be a Marine." But not long after that, he put a pull-up bar. He installed a pull-up bar in the door of my bedroom and said, "Hey, if you want to be in the military, you got to have upper body strength. Women can be challenged with upper body strength, so you got to start young." And then he got me running. I did not like running with him. I complained about it all the time, but he continued to reinforce a culture of fitness, because he recognized that was something that he knew was important in the Marine Corps and would be important if I were going to go into the service. And then right about the time that women were first going to the service academies, he said, rather than enlisting in the Marine Corps, maybe you ought to think about becoming an officer. And by the way, the service academies are opening up to women. I didn't really know what that was, but I had a Funk and Wagnall's encyclopedia set in my room. And so I looked up each of the service academies and started reading about them. And I focused on West Point because it said in there, the first federal military academy, had the reputation of being the toughest. Those granite walls, the history that goes back to the founding of our nation, all those things just really captured my imagination. And so I was probably 8 or 10 years old when I said, that's what I want to go for, and really set my mind on that, and geared much of what I did as a teenager towards having a really good application to go to West Point.
It's funny what you've said. So much of what you have said resonates with me. And for the audience's benefit, Diane and I were in the same Beast Barracks squad. We were just talking about this before the interview, and shared a common 4 years together at West Point. But I had no idea that our interests overlapped in the same way. For me, it was when I was 7. And my father brought home an Air Force Academy catalog. He had served in the Army Air Corps in World War II, my adoptive father. And like you, it's interesting you referenced uniforms, because I don't know if it's that it reinforces this idea that you're part of something larger than self, that you're part of this legacy and this group and team and organization that's not only large in number, but extends throughout the years. Because similarly, I looked up all the different service academies, and it was the history of West Point, just what you said, the granite walls, that all appealed to me in the same way. So it's interesting to hear you kind of bring that out. And that obviously addresses the question as to why the Army versus the Marine Corps, which is also very tough with a storied history and legacy as well.
Right.
When you think about our 4 years at West Point, what was your top takeaway?
Easily, it was teamwork, working together. That's something as an only child, I'm not sure that was obvious early on. I think when you're an only child, you do end up spending a lot of time by yourself. My dad did teach me to be independent minded and be able to take care of yourself. So I think I spent so much time doing that growing up, at least until I was in high school, and then joined the basketball team and learned a little, more about teamwork. I was in junior ROTC, and so certainly I was familiar with the value of working as a team. But West Point is so much harder, as you know. And I remember the early days, you and Jim Hermosinski and Beth Richards, and I was for somebody who had spent so much of my childhood dreaming about going to West Point, that summer was really hard for me. I did not embrace it quite like I imagined that I would. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. But you guys all were so encouraging, and we all worked together. And I figured out ways how little me could contribute to what was really a great group of people, and figured out where I fit. And everybody was positive while we were getting yelled at. And so it really helped me through that. And I never forgot that, always looking around me to see who needs some help, because that's definitely what you guys did for me to help get me through that first summer.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, but I would have to turn that around. And my memory is how unflappable and stoic you could be, and calm when things were going crazy. And I'm certain that's served you well throughout your career, because that is I think that's the most memorable quality I think I take away, was just how you seem to remain calm all the time. That and correcting my stance when I was on regimental staff, because my head always canted.
Oh my.
Well,
Yes, this is definitely a trip down memory lane.
yeah, sure is, sure is. Well, so you graduate from West Point, you're commissioned a second lieutenant. What what was the most important lesson you learned there? I mean, you're now formally in charge of troops. What did you come away with as a platoon leader?
I think it was where I first realized that everybody is watching you. Um, you know, I at West Point, I think as a cadet, at least for me, I was trying so hard to assimilate and blend in and not be noticed. You know, please nobody notice that I am clearly the shortest person in the whole group and an easy person to pick on. Um, to now, as a lieutenant, realizing that everybody is watching me, and so what do you do with that? It doesn't mean that you become self-conscious or pressured or worried or anything like that. It's just that now you have a platform to do something important, and that you're somebody that can make a difference in the lives of soldiers. And I think very closely related to that would be always being positive, being approachable, and recognizing that they really are going to copy in many ways what you do and how you act. And so how you act and what you do matters, and what you say really matters. And that's something that I really keep close to me all the time now, even more now probably, because even more people are paying attention. And so I think those were good lessons to learn early on. I think they've served me well in each of the positions. Sometimes I might think about it a little too hard. It's taken me a little bit of time to let go a little bit, and important to show that you're also human, you're not
Right.
perfect. But it does matter what you do and how you're seen, and what your values are, what your perceived values are.
Yeah, I love the fact you're emphasizing this idea of modeling the way and setting the example, leading by example. Who have you looked to in terms of models of leadership that have influenced and resonated with you?
So they're both positive experiences and negative experiences.
Right.
And as you know, sometimes we learn more from the people that we didn't appreciate a whole lot, or thought exhibited negative behaviors, than we do the people who exemplify great ones. But I certainly remember the ones who I remember the first officer to tell me good job in public. I remember the briefing. I remember who it was, and I remember who all was in the room. Because I guess up to that point, so this would have been about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years after graduation, that maybe that wasn't done very often, that we were also focused on the mission and getting the job done, that people weren't thinking about thanking and saying good job. And so I remember that captain who said good job at the end of a briefing in front of our battalion commander, and that just meant the world to me. And that's something I have carried forward, that you can't say good job or thank you too much, and it doesn't cost you anything to do it. It's once you get into the habit of doing it, and you notice the positive feedback, even if they don't say anything, you can tell that it's really appreciated, and it goes a long way. So I remember leaders who did that. I remember the leaders who listened, and I remember the leaders who talked over me, who didn't listen so much and were far more directive rather than taking all the input. I tend to be a person who listens, just because I have so much to learn, and I know that, and I know I don't have all the answers, and I need help. So I tend to be somebody who observes and listens. And then I remember the leaders who, on day one, trusted me and empowered me. And I remember the leaders who, on day one, told me, well, we'll see what you've got. And we'll see, kind of prove yourself first,
Right.
and then we'll figure out if we trust you or not. And so that taught me, I know how much that meant to me, taking the pressure off and allow me to just execute and be the best I could be. And so I try to do the same with new people who are coming on the team. Just trust them, assume that people are trying to do the right thing, going to do the right thing until they prove otherwise. And then it might be an education or training problem or training shortfall. Work on that, development, those types of things. And then, you know, if they don't live up to your standards at that point, then that's a
Right.
whole other story.
Right. Right. Well, as I recall, you were one that, I mean, I at least the impression that I came away with was that you were really joyful about just the journey itself, the career, the being part of a team and so on. You didn't strike me as somebody that was overly ambitious and like seeking to climb the ladder, like maybe some of our classmates that were very focused on that from the beginning. Um, I'm curious as to, I mean, you've shattered one glass ceiling after another, and I'm curious about the role of mentorship and networking in that and what that looked like for you.
You know, I know that there were people around me that uh, I watched, that I asked their advice at key points, you know, about maybe what should be my next assignment. Is there anything I should do better? What should I work on? But I would say I didn't do my part to invest in that, you know, for my own development. I don't know if that was my shortcoming. I don't know if it was leaders who weren't good at it. I don't know. But I mean, there was certainly mentoring going on. It just looked different, I think, or at least I just had a different experience with it. But I had a lot of people that helped me along the way, that advocated for me, that if, you know, I had my mind pretty set what the first few years were going to look like. I was going to be a platoon leader. I was going to be a company commander. I was going to go to graduate school, and I was going to go back to West Point.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that that's what I wanted when we graduated. And so I was fairly set in that. And I definitely and I would share that with my bosses, and they definitely supported it. And the academy supported me going back to teach. I would say, though, as I look back on that, the fact that I can't really, you can tell I'm kind of having trouble articulating exactly what the mentorship looked like. I am more deliberate as I look behind me and the people who work around me and the folks that I hope to help and hope to inspire in a more deliberate way, so that to make sure that they feel like somebody is interested in taking time with them beyond just I signed your memo, your recommendation to go to West Point. You know, that was
Right.
key. Obviously, I needed all that, but expanding the relationship with people who are junior to me and really being somebody that they can talk to, that I can, that we invest time in a relationship, and I keep track of them as
Right.
they move through, and we continue to have touch points along the way.
Would you say,
Because it
I
is
mean,
important. It is absolutely critical.
and so what would you advise as far as the potential mentee exercising initiative in seeking out that kind of relationship? Because I think culturally, you know, within the military, at least from my experience, within law enforcement, which was where I spent most of my career, I don't know that it's looked down on. It's just there just seems to be a value to not. It seems too self-seeking, I guess. I mean, what would be your advice, given the culture of the Army, but just, you know, the state of play as we encounter life, professional life today?
I would advise everyone to go seek out somebody that they believe that they want to follow, or that has an experience that they want to have, and be honest with them. I'm looking for somebody to guide me. I'm looking for a mentor, whatever the language is. And so I agree with you that, you know, this isn't just the Army, or it's not just soldiers, I should say, the civilians in the Corps of Engineers, and 98% of the Corps of Engineers is Department of the Army civilians. They have the same reluctance to reach up and initiate that relationship. And what and I would say probably even more so than soldiers do or junior officers do. And so I've told them, you cannot, what is the worst that's going to happen if you initiate that? First of all, no one is going to say, nope, not interested, go away. Right. It is so flattering to be asked to be a mentor. I mean, it is a joy. I think we wouldn't be in these jobs and people wouldn't serve in the Corps or in law enforcement or whatever if they didn't want to have those types of experiences with other people. These are people businesses. So I think we're all predisposed to do well at that. And so people, first of all, you're not going to get no. The worst thing that could happen is that it's no, and it's just a little bit embarrassing. And so you go to the next one, and I guarantee the next person's going to say, absolutely. When do you want to talk? How often do you want to talk? You know, and then start helping them map out whatever it is they're working on or whatever it is they want to pursue.
Yeah, I so appreciate what you've said, because I know my bias as starting out was it's a meritocracy. I'll make my own way. All that matters is my skill and my competence and my preparation. But the truth of the matter is that has to meet opportunity. And I think the more robust your relationships, again, as you said, no matter what you call it, more opportunities come to the fore that you can leverage your skill set to meet. So, yeah. One of the things that I try to do with the show is to kind of catalog some leadership resources. And so what's the best leadership book you've come across in the past year?
So in the past year, I read How Women Rise by Sally Helgeson, and I'm trying to remember, she co-authored it with somebody, his name slips my mind. I like that one. I've got other ones, but I read them before the previous to the past year. What I like about that one is, and why I recommend it to all of our leaders, is whether you're a woman or not, you're going to lead women in your formation or your organization. And I think it's important to know it's not that, I don't like generalizing, this is what women as leaders look like. This is what men do. It's not really that. But there are some things that are probably more prominent in women, how they lead or what prevents them from achieving their potential in the case of this book, and how that might be holding them back and they don't even know it. And so I think it's really good for leaders to be on the lookout for it. First of all, it was really interesting to me to see myself in one of the 12 characteristics or habits or whatever the terminology was, to see, I kind of do that. And maybe I wonder if that's held me back. I can definitely see it in some very talented women in our organization who aren't taking the next step to move up and, believe that they're happy where they're at, that they've reached their potential. They've been able to balance it with home life. And therefore, and so they have this story, they tell themselves that this is what's best. And actually it might be more of a tendency toward, whether it's lack of confidence, the desire to be perfect, or the worry that you have to be perfect, that you've already got to be qualified to be excellent at the next level before you jump into the arena, things like that, that they did they researched it and believe that there are some of these tendencies of women. So I think it's interesting, and I think it's provocative, and I think it's a good thing as to when you lead diverse organizations to understand how different personalities and demographics what they might bring to the table and what might be holding them back.
As you respond, I think about an executive that I worked with who was in charge of our domestic offices, 6,000 special agents assigned throughout the country. And what struck me was the demands of that position and everything else. And yet the expectations that she applied to herself, even on the home front, in terms of responsibilities for the children, and just kind of the duties, the things that need to be done there. And I just recall, how much pressure she felt to be perfect, across every domain. And so I'm curious about your reaction about that, but then also, this idea of work-life integration, because I think it plays out in a particular way with women to this day, even as we become more enlightened in terms of sharing responsibilities with family and so on. What are your thoughts there?
I think fortunately we are in the Army anyway, and that's probably a reflection of our society in general. We do seem to be turning a bend, or starting to make that turn, where I've noticed dads, husbands, I think feeling the same, starting to feel more of that responsibility, or at least I'm more aware that they feel those responsibilities in the same way that our female employees do. But you're right, it's definitely in the Army when it comes to attrition for female officers. Many get out at the 5 to 10 year mark. And it's why we don't have more women at the higher ranks, because it's, whether it's because of unconscious bias or whatever, that could be part of it. But no doubt an underlying bigger challenge is that a lot of women are leaving the Army at that point. And it is tied to the desire to have family, the desire to be present in their family's lives. And that does seem to be playing out at a higher rate. Well, it is playing out at a higher rate than it is for our male officers. So one of the nice things over the last couple of years has been the Army and Department of Defense in general to, at least from a policy standpoint, have the right things in place that will mitigate some of that will allow women and men to, whether it's take a break from military service in order to be a parent or do some other things and come back, adjust their year group, but bring them back in at the level that they were when they left. More empathy, by leaders. So many of the challenges that we face can be solved locally by individual leaders that are just a little more empathetic and aware. And it's okay if one member of your team has some other obligations that they need to attend to, and the rest of the team, we refer to it, unfortunately, as pick up for them or carry their load, and that's not really what it is. It's a whole team that we want to maximize. Everybody's going to need time to do other things and to balance or integrate their lives. And so everybody will benefit from that culture and that environment. But all that said, that's definitely the big part of the solution. It's also important that we lead with policy and at least remove some of the policy things that might be presenting obstacles. Whether, when a family decides that they want to have a child, this enormous burden to figure out when to do that, based on, especially if they're dual military, when do you do that? Because you can't be pregnant if you're in this job, and then you're non-deployable, and is that going to look bad on me? So maybe we should wait till the next assignment. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking. And so anyway, policy starts with policy, but it's also a cultural change and individual leadership skills that we need to evolve.
Let me ask you, when you talk about policy, because we face the same challenge in Homeland Security. I wanted to promote more women into senior executive service, but the steps, the hurdles that you jump on your path require moves and disruption of family and so on. And do you think there are any opportunities that COVID has presented in terms of giving people these, career or these qualifying assignments for advancement while minimizing the physical disruption or moves of families? Is there any opportunity there? I mean, that if the Army could figure that out, and everyone else could. I mean, it's no more demanding than in the military.
Yeah, I think the Army certainly desires to stabilize families, figure out a way. And, this isn't the first time the Army's looked at it. I know the Army has, other armies in the world leave people in place. In fact, unit organizations, as you know, become very close and very cohesive. Much of the rest of the world does it. It looks more like our reserve force, where you join your unit that's in your province or your state, and you pretty much stay there the whole time, and you work your way up through the ranks that way. And not until, except for by exception, do you have to move to go do jobs in different headquarters and get broadening experiences and things like that. And that, as you know, that rubs up against some other values, however, in the Army, where one of the strengths of the Army is that we are constantly cross-pollinating and bringing experiences, and people aren't getting so comfortable and complacent that other things suffer. And so, it's something that we wrestle with probably every decade, trying to figure that one out. But there is a desire to leave people in place longer. And if they request for a specific reason to extend, that the process of getting that approved isn't quite so onerous and isn't held against them. I'm in the Army Corps of Engineers, which looks more like a federal agency than it does the United States Army of all soldiers, which is a really great mix of these cultures that we're talking about. Most civilians of the 36,000 can stay in the same place. They will, however, reach a point where they can't. They got to wait for the person ahead of them to either retire or go somewhere else. And so that's a challenge. But at least that's been nice to see as a military person. It's been nice to see how well it actually works when people are in place for long periods of time. For COVID specifically, we are learning that maybe the telework and even remote work is going to be possible, that we're going to be able to apply that to more positions. It will be mission-based and evaluate whether a person is going to, not everybody is suited to do that, but the Corps of Engineers, our chief of engineers, has given us maximum flexibility to figure out at our level, local level, which positions could be remote. Can we expand flexible teleworking to allow some of this demand? And the Corps of Engineers has proven over the past 16 months that it can still perform, still meet the mission of the nation while being in the midst of the pandemic, and sometimes in maximum, sometimes in mandatory telework, sometimes remote work. As long as our systems, and we occasionally are getting together in person, and we deal with, mitigate the impact on some intangibles, like building the culture of the organization, integrating new employees, that as long as we address that in a healthy way, that we can be more flexible overall. So I think it's an exciting time to be in the Army, and it's definitely an exciting time to be in the Corps of Engineers.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to turn now. I mean, we talked about leading as a lieutenant, but I'd like to turn to leading as a general officer, because there's a difference between kind of that frontline leadership where you can actually put your hands on the people you're trying to influence. And as you alluded to earlier, leading through influence and through example and through establishing a climate. And what would you point to as one of your most fulfilling leadership experiences as a general officer?
There's a lot. I think, so I'll start. My first general officer position was at 10th Mountain. And at the time, I guess, I would have been 25 years of service, had never served at Fort Drum, had never been in a light infantry unit. I had been in 3ID, but 10th Mountain I knew was a completely different type of organization. I had a certain impression of what it was going to be like. And so I distinctly remember in May of 2015, driving from DC, where I'd been in a job in the Pentagon, headed to this big adventure that I just never imagined that I would go to 10th Mountain as a general officer. And but what I knew about Fort Drum is that not only was it light infantry, but it was tremendously cold. That it would be just, a glacier all year round. As you know, I'm from Southern California, so just that was intimidating. But and I got there, and not only is 10th Mountain a light infantry organization, it is also a very heavy with infantrymen who were in the Ranger Regiment, who had a lot of special operations, special forces, Ranger, all of that. And I was none of those, of course. And so I really didn't know what I was walking into. And it was kind of strange to be that late in my career and have some of those be questioning, gosh, was the Army making the right decision here? I'm not sure I'm the right person to be doing this. How am I going to be accepted? What am I going to have to overcome? Anyway, so I get there, I drive on to post, a beautiful post. I mean, just extraordinary. Of course, the first thing I notice is everybody's out running and ruck marching and doing all these things. I'm thinking, yep, definitely got to up my game on the physical side.
Well, you started doing these pull-ups at 6 and 7.
So, it's funny you say that, because I always fall back on that. I always tell myself, Diana, at least you can do pull-ups, and climb ropes,
Yeah.
It kind of goes along with that. Immediately, this organization that was all men, all Ranger tabbed, all infantry, I was so pleasantly surprised at how they received me, at how they introduced me to the organization, and how they entrusted me with broad responsibilities. So right off the bat, the division commander, and I was still a colonel at the time, hadn't been announced that I was going to be promoted, but people figure out what's going on by filling those roles. So as a colonel, so the division commander, he has to go on temporary duty, and he was gone for weeks at a time. I mean, we talked briefly, intermittently. He would pop in when he wasn't on TY. He had to go to schools. He had to go on site, but he had to do a bunch of things. So he was gone a lot. My fellow one-star general, the deputy commanding general for operations, he was down at Fort Polk overseeing the train up for 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain, that would eventually go to Afghanistan. So he was gone. I didn't even see him in my first 45 days at Fort Drum. And General Bannister, now the late General Bannister, he said, here's the deal. I'm going to be gone a lot, and you're going to have a lot of responsibilities. And I just want you to do what you do and feel like whatever you think you need to address, whatever you think you need to focus on or work on, you just go right ahead. Just keep me informed. So immediate, and it was wonderful. I mean, so I would go into the meetings, all these meetings, and meet people in these different sessions, and I'm the senior person there. And they were so patient with me. They embraced me as part of their team. I felt in some ways more empowered and more trusted in that organization than I have felt in other organizations who are probably more accustomed to women engineers, a more diverse team.
So Diana, how do you? Please.
No, I was just going to say, it was amazing. They accepted me like family. And I think it was another lesson is be careful in your perceptions of what you think an organization or people, who they are and what they do and what they value, because they overturned all of my assumptions on the spot. And I I wasn't there very long because I was very quickly announced to be the commandant at West Point, and I wasn't there very long. And I, as much as grateful as I was to go to West Point and thrilled to do that job, I hated leaving these folks. I mean, they were immediately like family.
So I have to confess, I'm stunned by that. I mean, I would assume that there would be a lot of skepticism, and so I mean, what are there 2 or 3 things that you would focus on or isolate that kind of created that welcoming environment? I mean, because I have to, I mean, I see the way when I was in the 82nd, I mean, if someone didn't have a Ranger tab and just, I think a general now this is back in the 90s, but just a general dismissive attitude towards women in terms of meeting physical challenges and all of that. I'm blown away by the fact you had such a warm reception. I mean, is there anything that you could point to that you think accounts for that cultural difference?
I think number one, it's the leader. It was General Bannister who made it clear to everybody that while I was wearing colonel rank, that I was going to be a general officer very soon, and that he expected, I mean, I was a little embarrassed by it. I kind of at the time thought, gosh, don't say that. When he said, you need to, you need to treat her and act just like you would around any other general officer. And so part of me was like, oh, geez, I feel like he's deliberately protecting me. I don't know. There was something that made me uncomfortable about it. But I think that was part of the formula. And, once people know where a leader stands, they're everything follows. I think the other thing about 10th Mountain is that family and community, and we say this is true about every Army community, but this is a small community. This is a division-sized post with in upstate New York, pretty rural, kind of rural setting, and a lot of 10th Mountain folks retired there. It's a long, very tight-knit community. It's almost, you can't really separate them. In fact, I joke about this. They're so much like family that when you miss an event out in the community, just like your family, they let you know, hey, we missed you. So I think that is actually more important to them. That is such a value that the rest just kind of works itself out. But the principle is family and team, and not so much about, are you a Ranger? Do you have the same experience? Now, I think perhaps the other thing that helped as well is I had served with General Bannister in Afghanistan. I had served with some of those brigade commanders and some of the staff in Iraq or Afghanistan. Our paths had crossed over the years, so I wasn't a complete unknown. So I know I was as stunned by it as you, and I just loved. In fact, even though I was in 10th Mountain for a very short period of time and was deployed with them to Afghanistan, but only for 2 months because I had to go to West Point. It's their pats that I wear here when I have a choice of about 4 of them.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, but you must have, over your extended career, experienced discrimination or bias. Well, I shouldn't assume that, but I mean, it's very likely. I would say. What did, if in fact that occurred, what did that look like?
What resistance or discrimination was there was pretty passive. It wasn't overt, and it often isn't. Sometimes that can be part of the problem. It's hard to nail down. It might be a comment. I would say there was certainly one time I was trying to get an assignment that I knew that I needed to have. It was a hardship assignment, so I figured if I'm volunteering to do it, and others don't care to do it, I mean, surely I could do it. I would be allowed to do it. There was nothing that technically prevented women from going to these jobs, this particular job, but there was no doubt in the way it was communicated back to me as to why I wasn't going, that it had to do with the organization didn't want a woman in there as a leader or as a field grade officer. But I think from that, I actually went on a better path. My branch rep told me I couldn't do that. You don't have any experience in that type of unit. I'm like, well, I know that's part of the problem. I need that experience in order to be competitive in the future. Well, it's not really, anyway, it was an awkward conversation. And then he wanted to send me to an organization, the same type that I had been in my entire career up to that point. And that's not what I needed to do. I needed to have a more diverse resume. And that's what led me to go to the School of Advanced Military Studies and stay that second year at Fort Leavenworth, because out of that would put me in a division headquarters, which is where I was trying to get some experience, and expose me to that. And that turned out to be a far better thing in the long run than my first choice, which had been to go to this particular unit and get that experience. Going to SAMS opened a lot of doors, and then going to a division headquarters, deploying to Iraq, understanding how a division fights in combat, being part of a plans team that orchestrated that was far more important and led to bigger things than had I done this plan A. So sometimes when these things happen, I'm happy that plan B is actually the one. It turns out plan B was meant to happen. When it's, like I said, it's been mostly small level things, just comments, at the end of the day, Kumar, unless it's something that I really have to address because either it's harming me, when it's directed at me, I focus on, all right, I always try to take a step back. What's the best way to handle this, both for the organization and for that person's development as well. So it kind of depends what it is, but I also keep the big view in mind, which is the way I'm going to change the culture of our Army is to continue to advance and stay in as long as possible and to touch as many people as I can. That's ultimately what's going to change. So I try not to change things, and I try not to get discouraged or frustrated or react in anger. Unless it's over the top. There's certain unacceptable behavior that's different.
Yeah, I think nothing speaks louder than just excellence at what you do and a solid work ethic and selflessness and all these things that overcome kind of the people that carp from the sidelines or have narrow minds in terms of working as part of a diverse and inclusive team, which I want to ask you about. I would imagine that, at least my experience is you kind of fall in on the unit you have, on the team that you have, because there are larger considerations that are driving assignments. But I do want to ask you, because maybe there's more opportunity and flexibility for that in the Corps of Engineers. How do you create more diversity and inclusion?
I'd like to start with how my thinking on this has evolved, because I think it resonates with a lot of folks, especially our generation. When we were at West Point, as I've already described, it was about being on the team, being considered part of the team, not standing out, assimilating, integrating, not being noticed, particularly from bat, never wanted to get in trouble. But, and if you remember, I don't know if you remember or not, but, it wasn't exactly encouraged for female cadets to wear skirts with their uniform, the uniforms that had that option. We couldn't have long hair until our senior year. That policy changed while we were there. We wore the long ties, just like the guys. So it was definitely about uniformity, fitting in, not standing out, don't separate as a group, and all of that. And that's a generational thing, I know. And I would say I pretty much adhered to that until, I don't know, probably for the first 2 decades of my career, which was if I just work hard, be part of the team, knowing that I might be the only woman on that team, or the first woman on that team, just through my example, that's going to lead to more diversity. That will both maybe inspire younger women, and it will also change the hearts and minds of the naysayers. So as a brigade commander, so at the 22, 23 year mark, I was visiting an engineer platoon doing a construction project. They were in an austere environment. They lived out there, they operated out there, and I was visiting them. And I noticed that this platoon, which was the same kind of platoon that I led as a lieutenant, from a diversity standpoint, looked exactly the same. When I was a platoon leader of an engineer platoon, there was me and there was one female soldier. And in this platoon, there was the female platoon leader and there was one engineer heavy equipment operator. And that heavy equipment operator, meaning a bulldozer operator, excavator operator, or, heavy equipment, that soldier was sitting in the command post tent, manning the phones, monitoring the phones. And when I saw her, I said, "Oh, are you?" I'm thinking maybe she's a admin soldier. Maybe I asked her, why? What's your job? Where do you work? Da da da. And she said, "Well, I'm a dozer operator." I said, "Really? Why are you in here?" Maybe she's hurt, right? I'm trying to tell myself all these stories. And she said, "No, but I don't think I'm cut out to operate a bulldozer, and this is, I'm just more comfortable in here." And I looked at her squad leader who's standing there, and I said, "So she's, do you think she's good enough to be a dozer operator?" And he said, "Well, she likes to, she seemed to be more comfortable in here." So I did a lot of soul searching after that visit, because it was that was the same stories we told ourselves 2 decades before. And I thought, how have we not made progress in this? So it was at that juncture that I realized that just an example of excellence, that just my own success and my own example, but quietly, quiet about the whole topic, isn't going to be good enough, because we haven't made any progress in 2 decades, at least from what I was seeing, the examples that I was seeing. And so I, realized at that point that more deliberate action is going to be required. It is not going to happen naturally. And I think for me, that's been a big, and it's same in the Corps of Engineers. We are going to continue. This is an incredibly professional organization. They want the best talent. They understand and embrace diversity, but we have a ways to go to become a diverse organization. But if we continue to do things correctly within policy, all things we can justify, and do things the same way we've always done it, diversity is not going to happen all by itself. It's going to take deliberate mentoring. It's going to take more oversight. It's going to take establishing some metrics. First of all, figuring out what are some of the ways that we can impact this on the margins, and then how do we measure ourselves, and then how do we, and then we got to message our formations. Here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Here's the progress we're making. And that's going to be extra. That's, and
right.
That we have gone through times in our Army's history where we have been very deliberate, and then we feel like we've kind of made it, and then overcome by other events, and we kind of lose track of that. And we're really good at measuring whether we're experts or sharpshooters on the range. We're really good at figuring out if somebody passes a PT test. We haven't been as deliberate and consistent about what are we going to do to make sure that our Army represents the society it supports and defends. That is critical. That is of national security importance, that we continue to be that Army. So
Would
So
you
my
make that
approach
connection?
now, yeah.
Would you make that connection more explicitly? Because I don't think it's intuitive to many folks. People think of an army as just, killing people and breaking things. What is the national security impact of having a diverse and inclusive team that represents a society it's called to protect?
Well, number one, we need the people and the talent to have the best army possible to operate in what is a increasingly complex world. And it's also important that all parts of our society, urban, rural, West Coast, East Coast, Southeast, Alaska, Hawaii, believe that we represent their values. Because if we don't, and we have division between our society and its army, and we become disconnected from it, that's very dangerous. That signals down, that has signaled down the downfall of civilizations when there's that much of a gap between them.
Yeah.
I think it's essential. It's as important as anything else our army does.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think there's already a disconnect with an all-volunteer army in the sense that so few, I forget what the percentage is. I think it's in single digits of people in American society more broadly that know or come in contact with a service member. So I do think that we have to place a great emphasis on that to maintain their trust, as you've indicated. I would be remiss if I didn't look at your experience as commandant of cadets and really kind of explore a little bit developing, growing, building leaders. You were the 76th commandant of the Corps of Cadets. I don't know if the mission statement has changed from the time when we were there. It was building leaders of character for the U.S. Army and nation. I think it was at that time. So I'm curious as to what the program looks like now, today, how it's evolved from the time that we were there as cadets.
I think the principal way, the most noticeable way that it's changed from the time we were there is the mindset that it's more of a developmental experience, professional growth, as opposed to attritional.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make sure only the best get to the end zone? Now it's how do we make sure as many of these talented people who made this choice will get to the end, because that's ultimately the leadership style we want in our army too.
Right.
And so they've really tried to move towards that, and that's, I think, been very healthy. And in many ways, it's harder to be a cadet there today than it was in the late 80s. Had I had to go through that survival swimming class they got to do,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I would have made it.
Mm-hmm.
And they are incredibly busy, and I know we were busy too, but the demands on them and how they are evaluated is pretty comprehensive, and a lot of time spent on their own leadership and leadership development, as opposed to the fourth class system. So there is the four class system still, but sort of, it's nothing like it was when we were there. And so it looks more like the Army than it used to. And I think that's probably building, in the end, a better product.
How does the Army and how does West Point assess that you're delivering the leaders that the Army needs? We talk about the difficulty in measuring. It's easy to measure PT tests and all these other grades and all that, but how do you ultimately assess whether we're delivering what the Army deserves, what our troops deserve?
That is something we certainly, I know while I was there, we constantly analyze what is the best, what metrics do we use for that? Do we use that they're staying in the Army? Do we use their, how many of them become general officers, or how many of them become battalion commanders, or whatever? All of that, I think the Academy looks at and the Army looks at. The Academy does surveys of Army leaders, of your junior officer, of your West Point population, how do they compare to ROT, other forms of commissioning, other sources of commissioning, and asking specific questions. Are they leaders of character? Are they honest? Are they, do they have soft skills? Can they think through complex problems? And by and large, all of the the results that come back, the feedback that West Point gets from all these different sources is that it's a very strong program and that it's making really good leaders. It's fostering good leadership. Yeah. So, and they're good people to begin with. So
Right.
that helps.
Right. Well, as you consider your career, you look across the full scope of it. You've had so many firsts. I mean, the first woman to do this, the first woman to do that. And then I know that there are other professional achievements and accomplishments that have nothing to do with your gender. What is your proudest achievement?
Professionally, I guess I look at it more, not so much what I have had the privilege to do, but to be in positions where I get to see people do amazing things. The vantage point that I've had at each of these levels, at each of these positions has, I'm just continuously inspired by what people accomplish, whether they are civilians, our Department of the Army civilians, or they're uniformed soldiers. It's pretty much the same. They want to do well. They want us to be proud of them. They want us to recognize their achievements. They want to be part of a bigger team. And especially when you have those instances of somebody that didn't have confidence, lacked confidence, thought they didn't fit in, thought they didn't have something to contribute. And then you see them as part of a larger team, recognize their abilities and gain that confidence and overcome great hurdles, whether it's in places like Afghanistan or Iraq, or it's back home with local missions. It's just, and to see that reaching their potential, I think is what I'm most proud of, is to observe things like that.
I hear that, and I appreciate your focus on service to others before self, in terms of what you're pointing to, in terms of what's made your career fulfilling. Diana, where can our listeners go to learn more about you and your organization?
Well, they can learn about me. I am pretty active on social media. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Right now, I mostly populate Facebook because it is my personal account, but I use it to highlight the organization. It gives me control of the content, more direct control of the content. I like to take pictures and I like to show them. So Diana Holland on Facebook, and I'm wearing a hard hat in my profile picture, so it's obvious who I am. LinkedIn as well, for similar reasons. As far as learning about the organization, the Corps of Engineers got its own webpage, but it's also on LinkedIn and Facebook primarily. So that's how you find out about the organization. Read about the incredible work that the Corps of Engineers does in this country. It's pretty astonishing. Most Americans don't know how instrumental the Corps is currently, but also how instrumental the Corps has been in building this nation since its founding, because the Corps was founded at the same time of the founding of the country, and right around the same time as West Point was established and all that. It's all interlinked. And the Corps has done so well at those things and has such a reputation for it that its scope has really expanded. And every year the Corps is entrusted with more money and bigger projects. And we're about to, if the infrastructure bill is passed, there's a sizable investment in the Corps to do work on infrastructure, even more work on infrastructure. So it's a great time to be part of the Corps of Engineers. And by the way, one other pitch is that they're not not everybody is an engineer in the organization. It has an engineer mission, but many different specialties: environmental specialists, biologists, archaeologists, attorneys. It's amazing the breadth and scope of what this organization does. And then it's got the unique aspect of you get to be in the Army. As a civilian, you get to be part of a big Army endeavor, very rewarding for our employees. So we have a pretty good retention rate. It's getting civilians to join because they're not sure, gosh, do I have to join the Army? Do I have to go to boot camp? 98% of the organization is civilian. They do not have to go to boot camp. They do not have to wear a uniform, but they like the idea of also serving their country alongside soldiers. So it's pretty amazing.
Well, General Holland, Diana, we've known each other since 1986, when as teenagers, we were assigned to the same squad during Beast Barracks at West Point. And then we spent 4 years together in Bravo Company 4th Regiment, where our company motto was Go Buffaloes. A unique feature of bison, I didn't know at the time, but I learned later, is when a storm's coming, they turn into the storm rather than trying to run away from it. And by running at the storm, they run straight through it, minimizing the amount of pain and time and frustration that they experience from that storm. So you spent a lifetime leaning into challenge and bringing the rest of the herd through the storms with you. So first and foremost, thank you for your service to our nation and your sustained investment in our leaders of the future. But on a personal level, thank you for being so generous with your time today.
Well, Kumar, thank you for inviting me. It's been great to talk with you again, and have enjoyed serving with you when we were young. I've enjoyed watching your experiences in the Army and after the Army, and it was great to reconnect. I appreciate your time.